I am so incredibly excited to have you here today because we're going to dismantle one of the most seductive, universally accepted lies we see in the media. I'm talking about the myth of the sudden lucky break. You know exactly what I mean, right? We all kind of love this idea that success is just a lottery ticket away, a sudden lightning strike of discovery that changes a person's life literally in an instant. But when we actually look at the data, and believe me, we are going to look closely at the data today, that story falls apart completely. Okay, let's dive right into this. We see headlines exactly like this constantly. Unknown creator goes viral overnight, or unknown founder becomes billionaire out of nowhere. It's a deeply satisfying narrative, isn't it? It's dramatic, it's highly clickable, and it really drives home this false idea that success just happens in a single dramatic moment of discovery. But here's the absolute biggest problem with this headline. It almost always starts the story at the exact moment the story actually finishes its hardest chapter. So the media's version is always one lucky break and sudden fame. But the actual truth hiding behind that fame, it's usually 10 quiet years of entirely unrewarded effort. Now, why does this happen? Well, it's not necessarily a malicious lie. The media just compresses years and years of grinding work into a tiny footnote, often just a passing phrase like, after years of trying, because they only start paying attention when there's finally something visually interesting to report. They point the cameras when the applause starts, entirely missing the empty rooms that came before it. Part 1. The Hidden Pattern, Analyzing 50 Stories. To really understand how this whole thing works, we need to transition into the core data of today's explainer. The source material we're breaking down analyzed 50 of these massive overnight success stories across business startups, entertainment figures, and elite sports. We're looking for the hidden pattern behind the curtain. Now, a sample size of 50 is significant. When you look at 50 distinct, isolated cases of people hitting the absolute peak of their industries, whether it's a tech billionaire building hardware in a freezing garage or a famous author getting rejected by a dozen publishers, a rock-solid pattern emerges that shatters the myth of random luck. Every single one had the exact same thing hiding behind it: years that nobody filmed. Let's actually walk through this timeline because it is incredibly revealing. Look at this massive, empty gap between year zero and the eventual public breakout moment. The public tends to think the start line is right before the breakout, but the actual start, year zero, usually happens a decade earlier. Then you have year 4, characterized by quiet, honestly often failed attempts. The visible breakout almost universally landed somewhere between 5 and 15 years after these individuals began. I mean, just think about that for a second. That is 5 to 15 years working with zero external validation. Nobody telling them they were great, no viral metrics, no massive income, just a massive, empty gap of unrecognized effort. So the absolutely crucial point here is this actual data-backed breakout pattern. First, as we just saw, it takes 5 to 15 years. Second, it involves multiple failed attempts. The visible breakout was rarely the first swing. Most of these people had at least one earlier attempt that totally failed, either publicly or quietly. The thing that eventually worked was usually their third, fourth, or even fifth major attempt. And perhaps most paradigm-shifting of all, luck is just a trigger. We really need to completely redefine the word luck here, because in all 50 case studies, the lucky break didn't cause the success. The lucky break was simply a trigger applied to years of quietly built preparation, skill, and infrastructure. It's like a spark, sure, but it only worked because the person had already built enough capacity and a large enough body of work to capitalize on the moment it finally arrived. If that luck had hit them at year 1 instead of year 10, no way. They wouldn't have been ready to catch it. Luck is not a root cause. Part 2. Inside the quiet years. If you are currently working hard on something and feeling like you are getting absolutely nowhere, I really want to validate your struggle by looking at what those 5 to 15 years actually look like day to day for these highly successful people. Because day to day, the quiet years look boring. They are small. They are incredibly unglamorous. It is just repeated effort with little feedback and absolutely no guarantee that it'll ever lead anywhere. It's long stretches of time with an audience of essentially no one. And I want to confide in you here, this is exactly why most talented people quit during this phase. It's not because they lack the talent or the skill. It's because it is genuinely, deeply hard to keep investing your life into something with no visible proof that it's actually working. But, that brings up a pretty fascinating question. We hear never give up literally all the time. But was it really just persistence? If you just blindly refuse to quit, is that a guarantee you're going to eventually make it? This creates a huge shift in our narrative, because the data says that just blindly grinding away isn't the whole answer either. And here's the midpoint twist. pure, stubborn repetition of a failing approach, that just leads to failure. Actually, scratch that, it leads to burnout and failure. The honest answer is persistence combined with genuine adjustment. The people who achieved the eventual breakout showed up long enough, yes, but they stayed honest enough with themselves to pivot. They changed their approach, their medium, or their audience when things just weren't working. It wasn't just persistence, it was adaptable persistence. Part 3, The Blueprint, Surviving Your Quiet Years. So how do you actually do that? Based on the source material, there are 3 actionable steps you can control right now while you wait for the world to catch up. These are the things that separated the people who made it out of the quiet years from the massive graveyard of talented people who didn't. First, keep a progress record. Second, treat silence as data. And third, maintain small, consistent output. Let's break these down real quick. Step 1 is about keeping a record. Almost universally, the 50 success stories could point to concrete evidence of their own improvement over time. They kept their earlier drafts, their early prototypes, their old cringy videos. Why does this matter? Well, because concrete evidence of improvement provides internal validation when outside validation is literally zero. When no one is clapping for you, you need a way to prove to yourself that the work is actually going somewhere. Keeping a record gives you that proof. Moving on to step 2, how do you view a lack of visible success? Unsuccessful people view a failed launch or a quiet year as a final verdict, like absolute proof that the entire effort was a mistake and they should just quit. But the successful group, they viewed it as vital data. They treated the silence purely as information about what they needed to adjust. It wasn't an insult to their identity, it was just a compass pointing them toward the next necessary pivot. And finally, step 3. The data showed that keeping the actual output going in small amounts was far more common than waiting for the perfect conditions to make one giant dramatic effort. Consistency at a small scale, sustained over years, beats the grand isolated gesture every single time. It's about showing up on the days you really don't want to, doing a tiny piece of the work, and letting the compound interest of that effort build your infrastructure. I want to deliver this incredibly powerful realization directly from the source material. During those 5 to 15 years, the journey was, quote, from the inside, indistinguishable from failure. I really want you to let that sink in. If your effort hasn't been recognized yet, that was never proof it isn't working. We have to reframe your current lack of recognition. It is not a failure. It is a standard prerequisite for success. Every single one of the 50 legends analyzed went through a decade where their lives looked exactly like failure. Which leaves us with this final inspiring thought. The overnight moment was never really overnight. It was just the first time anyone else was finally watching. All the magic happened in the dark. So I want to hear from you. Take this energy, head down to the comments and tell me, what is the quiet, unglamorous, unrewarded work that you are grinding on right now? What are you building in your quiet years? Because the clock is ticking and year 0 has already started. Keep showing up, keep adjusting,